You need to get a literary agent. What you need is to get your book picked up by a publisher. You need to find yourself a publisher now that you have published so much so that they can promote the books for you. Blah, blah, blah. I have heard some variation of these phrases a lot over the past few years as a self-published author. And most of the time, they are said in good faith, usually by people who don't quite understand how the entire publishing process works. When people say this, they are incredibly unaware of the amount of time it takes to go from writing a book to getting an agent to getting a publishing contract and to finally getting your books on bookshelves. Now, I am very happy as a self-published author at this present moment in time. However, long term, I would like to be a traditionally published author. I would like to be what is known as a hybrid author, who is someone who is both self-published and traditionally published. But what is the process of getting a publisher? Well, the first step is that you have to write the book that you want to see published by a publisher. This can take anywhere between 6 months and 10 years, depending on how fast you are able to write, the length of the book, how old you are, etc. If you started writing the book when you were 14, it's probably going to change quite a bit by the time you are 20. Then you have to revise the book, i.e. read through it, make some changes, change what you have written, go through it, make sure that it is all flowing, blah, blah, blah. And then you want to get somebody else to read through the book for you. This can be known as an alpha reader, someone who is going through the first kind of version of the book. And this is usually another writer or a friend or a loved one. And then after that, you'll want to make some more changes to the book. Perhaps you'll then pay an editor, a professional editor, to read through it and give you an editorial critique. I have done this myself a few times. And then after that, what you'll want is to start querying your book, i.e. sending your book to agents so that they can represent you. Because in order to get a publisher, 90% of the time you need to be first represented by an agent, as they will then pitch your manuscript. You can, of course, pitch your book yourself to publishers. There are publishers who accept what is known as unsolicited manuscripts. However, this is incredibly difficult and it's genuinely not recommended. But of course, before you actually get your agent, you have to research agents. You want to look at maybe around between 20 and 50 agents. And you also have to make sure that you're finding an agent who matches the genre and the tone and the style of your book. If you've written a horror story, it would be naturally very pointless to submit your book to someone who represents young adult romance, etc. Querying can take, I don't know, anywhere between 6 months and 2 years in terms of querying and actually getting someone to represent you. And there are lots of other authortubers who can talk about this much more in depth than me, as I am not actually at the stage where I have queried a little bit in the past when I was a teenager, but I've obviously not gotten to the stage where I've gotten an agent. If you're lucky, you might get an agent within 3 or 4 months of emailing. You might send your book to 20 agents and one of them might say, bang, yes, I'd like to represent you. But that is very rare. What then happens is you and your agent will talk about your book and you'll probably have to revise it another 4,000 times. Maybe get some beta readers in as well to get their feedback. And then once the book is in the best possible shape that it can be, and you and your agent are both happy with it, then they will start submitting the book to publishers. And this is known as being on submission. And what happens is that your book will be submitted to publishers and the agent will negotiate a price for the book. And once the book is accepted by a publisher, you get what is called a publishing deal, a book deal, a publishing contract. It's all the same thing. And then after that, it can be another maybe 1 to 3 years before you actually see your book on the bookshelves. So we'll say at the very least, at the very minimum, from writing the book to getting an agent to getting your book on the shelves, the minimum length of time this takes is probably around 5 years, I would say. Maybe as little as 3 years if you have been very, very quick. And also, again, if you're older, you're likely to be more experienced. But if you're only a teenager, as I was when I wrote these books, I was about 17 when I started writing Anne, and I came up with the story when I was about 9. And I was also about 17 when I was working on Every Last Thought, which is the first novella in this book. So I published them when I was 21, and that was self-publishing, bearing in mind. So when somebody says you should get an agent, you should get a publisher, you should get someone to represent you, they're usually very unaware of all of these steps. As I said earlier, or maybe I didn't, but I'm going to say it anyway again, I am happy as a self-published author at the moment. This month of October 2021, I have actually hit my goal of 3 figures, which is fantastic. And I'm going to talk about that more in a future video and also in my vlogs. I write both under my real name and as Diana Vale, which is a romance author pen name. And my Diana Vale romance books are going to be self-published indefinitely. I could probably have a very nice career for myself forever as a self-published author, but I don't want that for myself. I would like to have an agent and a publisher someday. But this does not discount self-publishing. This is just a very personal decision. It's something which I do want for myself, but I don't need to. No author who is self-published actually needs to be traditionally published. And plenty of authors do very much enjoy being self-published and have long careers where they make 5, 6, even 7 figures per year as self-published authors. It is not an uncommon thing. In fact, it is much more common than you may think. But the book that I want to get represented by an agent has to be the right book. I actually have a story called Tic-Tac-Toe, which I was thinking of submitting to agents this year, and I sent it to an editor for some feedback. And the editor strongly advised that I self-publish due to the content of the book. And having looked over it myself, I also realized that yes, self-publishing this book is going to be more appropriate, and I'm planning to self-publish it and release it somewhere between March and April of 2022. I have another story, a YA fantasy story, which is much more commercial, which I've been working on since I was 10 in 2008, but properly working on it, I would say, since 2014 when I was 16. So we'll say I've been working on that book for about 7 years. And that book is still not done. So while I do want to get that book published someday, it's a process. People don't just get their books published. You have to have the right story. You have to make sure the story is done. And then you have to submit to agents. It is not a process which happens like that. So I know that most people are not aware of this, because why would they be? If you're not in the publishing world, then you would obviously have no idea how this works. But people really need to stop putting this pressure on authors who are either A, happy being self-published and don't ever want to be traditionally published, or B, currently self-publishing or currently just working on their books and do want to be traditionally published but are not quite there yet. It takes time. And if somebody wants to be a traditionally published author and doesn't even want to self-publish at all, it takes time. Don't just say to an author, when's your book going to be out? Because they likely have no idea.